Let's try this again. Crazy. Guys, I got the blue screen of death and this thing just completely shut down. Hi, Huli. Yes, I'm back. I'm just going to message Jason. I got back in. Just got back in. Sorry, guys. That's really embarrassing, this computer. It's not very old, but unfortunately, a couple of months ago, I accidentally spilled coffee on the keyboard, and this thing has acted up ever since. So yeah, Super Chat is open tonight. Guys, send me all the money so I can get a new computer. No, I will fix it. Crazy night. It is what it is, guys. I do apologize. Shit happens and you move on. So where were we? Apparently Sasha and Jason said you guys were chatting away in there, so hopefully you guys kept that going, and obviously you guys are making it back in here slowly. I think I had said, can we determine the correct starting point from just, what Forrest Fenn tells us is the first clue, that being, begin it where warm waters halt. And again, I think he's kind of told Phil Bayman and Steve that, that is not enough information for one to move with confidence in order to find the treasure, right? So I look at that and I go, if we cannot figure out the correct starting point with just that information, then is, where warm waters halt the correct place that we're actually supposed to begin our quest? Is that the physical location that is our starting point? Right? I guess that's the question I'm trying to get across is that, again, this could be just my confirmation bias, me being, believing that the 9 sentences could be, simply the 9 clues. I see that begin it where warm waters halt is just a single line or verse from the poem. I don't see it as a complete sentence or a complete thought. So again, everything that I'm going to talk about tonight, of course, is really, based on that bias that I have. Okay. And I know you guys know that. You guys are all smart in this chase, but we all have to admit that we all have our own biases, and mine is just that. But I'm going to try and make sense of this thought process with you guys. So if we don't believe that we can determine the correct starting point with just begin it where warm waters halt, then is that an oversimplification of the clue? And if Forrest Fenn has said, to answer some questions and save others from being asked, I did follow the clues in the poem when I hid the treasure, although I hid the treasure before the poem was complete. Now, are we, as searchers, supposed to believe that he is using the word followed in the literal sense, or is he talking in the figurative sense? Because in the literal sense, we are supposed to take it to mean that he physically, step by step followed, from clue 1 all the way to clue 9 when he went and physically hid the treasure. But in the literal sense, we could take it to mean, or excuse me, in the figurative sense, we could take it to mean that Forrest Fenn understood all 9 clues when he went to hide the treasure chest, but he didn't necessarily physically follow them. So I think there is a little bit of a difference between how we interpret the word followed. Again, is it the literal or the figurative sense? And it's kind of like Forrest Fenn says just prior to the poem. So I wrote a poem containing 9 clues that, if followed precisely, will lead to the end of my rainbow and the treasure. So he's telling us that he's written this poem that we must follow it precisely. So are we taking the fact that we are supposed to follow those steps from 1 to 9 literally, or are we supposed to figuratively follow them and understand or comprehend the clues? So this is a little bit of that, tug back and forth. I don't know whether he means in the literal sense or the figurative sense. But let's just go down a little bit of this rabbit hole together, and let's just, talk about literally following, as in putting one foot down in front of the other or stepping on the other, kind of like he talks about in the Moby Dickens. Cheers to you guys. I mean, this might be a few beers, the way things are going tonight, guys. So let's just talk about the literal. If Forrest Fenn, and we believe he's being truthful, again, Marvin Fenn, you know, as he says in the book, Marvin told him, Forrest, you should always tell the truth, but you shouldn't tell all of the truth. So we have to assume that Forrest Fenn is being truthful in the fact that he is saying, I did follow the clues when I hid the treasure, right? So let's just assume if he's following him and the first clue is begin at where warm waters halt, are we to assume that Forrest Fenn then physically started at whatever warm waters halt is and then followed those clues consecutively or in chronological order all the way to where he hid the treasure? If that is the case, then we must assume that Forrest Fenn started at begin at where warm waters halt, and then he took it in the canyon down, right? But then not far, but too far to walk. Well, now if Forrest Fenn is saying that it is too far to walk, why would he then start at where warm waters halt? Because, you know, it's just too far to walk. And that's kind of the question I'm posing. Did Forrest Fenn really start at warm waters halt? Did he physically go to that location and then take it in the canyon down? You know, now some of you may say, well, no, he didn't walk because it was too far to walk. There may be a road or something that he took down. I'm not saying that's not possibly the case. That may possibly be the case, right? We may think that. And I think a lot of people may think that, right? What are your guys' thoughts on that? I'm going to go up here and just see what kind of questions we got going on. Well, Adam, go get yourself a beer, brother. I don't know what kind of beer you drink. Usually I drink some good craft beers or some microbrew stuff, but I'm just drinking a regular old Bud Light tonight. Green Ray, Rodney's saying he really doesn't think each clue is multiple points. I agree with that. Let's just look at this a little bit, right? Now, here's a couple of things that Forrest Fenn has said. And the first one comes out of the Moby Dickens 2013 video. He said, there are several people that have deciphered the first two clues. I don't think that they knew it because they walked right on past the treasure chest. Now, if we are to assume the first clue is simply where warm waters halt, then what do we think the second clue is? Now, I'm not necessarily saying I think that, because you guys know what I think, but if most people don't agree with the 9 sentences possibly being the 9 clues, and that's okay. I can't prove that it is. It's just my theory. I'm not the one that originated that theory, but it's just a theory that I hold, you know, very strongly. I believe that it could be. But if several people have deciphered the first, you know, 2 clues, but Forrest Fenn doesn't believe that they knew that, and then they walked right on past, are we assuming that they too started at where warm waters halt and then walked down the canyon, but then walked past? How far did they walk? You know, did they walk too far? Did they walk, you know, 10 miles or whatever that possible distance is that's not far but too far to walk, and then went right on past, you know, those others, not knowing they were so close? I mean, how far did these people walk? I mean, they had to walk 10 miles or whatever, and then they had to walk back that distance. Are we talking 20 miles? You know, that it just doesn't make sense to me. You know, I mean, unless, I mean, there's some people that think that not far but too far to walk may mean that you're having some other mode of transportation, or that you know, I think there's a water crossing, you know, possibly in the poem. Maybe some people think that you're on one side of the river and that's where warm waters halt, and you got to get across to the other side of the river. Maybe that's their thought process. But then when they were at warm waters halt, Were they theoretically 500 feet from the treasure? Maybe. I mean, there's different, you know, thought processes you could go with this, right? I mean, I've heard these things all across the spectrum. Cheers. And then here's another one that came out of, this is from Dal Neitzel's cheat sheet, and you guys can look this up if you want. But Forrest Fenn has been quoted as saying, some folks correctly mentioned the first 2 clues to me in an email and then went right past the other 7, not knowing they had been so close. So again, you know, there's people that are, you know, physically out there that have deciphered the first clues and then walked past them. There's people that have emailed him, you know, the correct first 2 clues, but then went past the other 7. Again, there's this, you know, 2 clues and then went past, you know, the other 7 clues in the poem, you know. And then there's this one from the Julius Brighton video, and I can't remember what year this was from. This is the one that had Dal Neitzel in it too. But Forrest Fenn says in this video, he said, there have been a few people within 500 feet. I think some people have been within a couple hundred feet. They figure the first 2 clues, but they don't get the 3rd and the 4th, and they go right past the treasure. So again, there's people that are figuring out the first 2 clues, and then they go right on past it because they don't get the 3rd and the 4th clue. So it's like there's this transition somewhere, you know, between the 2nd and 3rd clue that people are not comprehending, either in, you know, just sitting at home and armchairing this thing and they don't get it. You know, they figure out the correct area, but then they go right on past the other ones for whatever reason. Then there's people that are physically there, you know, in the correct area, but then they go past, you know, these other clues. So it's kind of, how do you look at this? How do you look at it is what do you think those first 2 clues are? Do you simply think that first clue is begin at where warm waters halt, and that second one is the canyon down? So where is that, you know, where are they misstepping at that 3rd and 4th clue that they're going right past, you know, the other 7 clues is my question. And it just leads me to believe that I don't think Forrest Fenn physically followed in the literal sense of following the clues, you know, from the first clue all the way through all 9. When you think of it in the way of the clues maybe just begin at where warm waters halt, the 2nd clue may be the canyon down, the 3rd not far but too far to walk, the 4th put in below the home or brown or something like that. I don't think that he actually followed those, because one, he says it's just too far to walk. You know, for a man that's 80 years old, it may not be too far to walk for me at 50 or somebody else in here at 30 or 20 or whatever their age is. It may not be too far to you, but the architect of the poem, you know, and he's the one that wrote this, he's saying it's too far to walk. So I don't think he physically started at where warm waters halt and walked down the canyon. So I just don't think that where warm waters halt is the actual starting point. And I don't think that just information is enough to give us the correct starting point. So that's why I'm saying I think that what Forrest Fenn is telling us is the first clue, maybe an oversimplification of that first clue. Isn't that what he tells Phil Bayman? You oversimplify the clues, you know? And I think that while Forrest Fenn is not lying to us in telling us that the first clue is beginning at where warm waters halt, I don't think he's maybe telling us all of the truth. Because if he told us all of the truth, and maybe the whole clue was that entire sentence, that may be giving away more information than he really wants to give away, right? He's not lying to us. He's just not telling us all the truth. Hope you guys are following me on this. And here's one thing that stood out to me. And this comes from People magazine. I guess this came out in 2016. And this kind of falls into this thought process. Forrest Fenn says, it took me 2 trips in my car to hide the treasure. And I can tell you that an 80-year-old man is not going to make a trip into a canyon, then come back up and go down again. So even he is saying himself that I'm not going to make a trip into a canyon. Okay. If he's talking about these 2 trips, and I think Sasha's done a good job of explaining, what those 2 trips and what he carried on those 2 trips. So that first trip, he gathers all the gold and treasure and everything that's going to go inside the treasure chest, and he makes that first trip to the location. He then comes back and he gets the treasure chest and then takes it back to that location. So he's telling you that he took 2 trips, but an 80-year-old man is not going to, walk down into a canyon, then come back up and then go back down again. He's saying he's not going to do that. One, it's just too far to walk, like he's saying in the poem, it's just too far to walk. So I think that starting point of where he physically parked his car has got to be much closer to the treasure's location. That's got to be a shorter distance. I mean, what did he say? He said, and this was in October 2014, and I think it was a featured Q&A called Talking in Circles. When he asked, when someone asked him how far did he walk when he hid the treasure chest, and he said he didn't want to be that bold and tell him that distance, but he said, if it helps you, I walked less than a few miles. So we got to believe, if we're to believe what he's saying in the preface of Too Far to Walk, that the distance that he, floated down the Madison River was about river distance of about 9 or 10 miles or whatever he says in there. And if that's equivalent to what is not far but too far to walk, and he's saying that he walked less than a few miles, and those 2 round trips that he had to make from his car, then it just doesn't make sense in my mind. And I can't wrap my head around that if that's where he physically started at whatever Warm Waters Halt is. And he's being truthful that possibly that distance could be, too far to walk, right? So I've got to believe that wherever he parked his car, and possibly the actual starting location that we're supposed to, actually from there proceed, is got to be a much shorter distance. And it's probably, in my interpretation, not whatever or wherever, whatever you think Warm Waters Halt is, actually is. So I think that starting point has got to be somewhere else. And I'm kind of repeating myself here because I'm trying to just keep on focus, and it's hard to sometimes put these thoughts into actual words. It should be simple, but it's not. And I know we're supposed to simplify this thing, but to put it in words and trying to explain it without giving too much away is difficult. Cheers. So here's what I'm thinking. Okay, a lot of people think that Warm Waters Halt must be a geothermal feature. I don't necessarily agree with that. And let me explain something. As Forrest Fenn has said, there are many places in the Rocky Mountains where warm waters halt. Okay, we've got to think, sure, could it be a geothermal feature? Sure, absolutely. I'm not saying it's not. My interpretation is completely different. I've got to think about, if you go back to, I think it's scrapbook 248, and 248 or 249, this is a response to the guy who did this whole rappelling going down into the canyon of the Yellowstone. We all know about this, right? And Forrest Fenn talks about him and Donnie's, excursion and going down there. And he says something about, the waters in the canyon were mean looking white waters. And this is water that's in the canyon, right? So I've got to ask myself, okay, if the waters in the canyon are mean looking white water, what are those waters when they're not in the canyon or before the canyon? Could they be warm waters? And what I mean by that is, could they be comfortable, calm, slow moving waters? Because you got to ask yourself, what happens to water before it goes into a canyon? Does it not make a transition? Does it not make a transition from being slow moving, meandering waters to then starting its descent into an actual canyon? Is there a point that water transitions figuratively or whatever from being slow moving waters to start going down, that turn into mean looking waters. Could that transition between slow moving and fast moving waters be what warm water's halt is? But is that something that you can physically pinpoint geographically? Can you point to an exact point on a map and say, hey, that's the physical place where, you know, the transition happens? Well, maybe if you've got a cliff and it drops over a waterfall, right? Maybe you could. Some people think a waterfall is in play. Could be. Who knows? But what I'm saying is that if there are many places in the Rocky Mountains where warm waters halt, you also have to agree that there are many canyons in the Rocky Mountains, right? So just as there are many places where warm waters halt, there's just as many canyons out there. So I don't think the focus is the starting point of actually being that precise place where warm waters halt, if it is in fact that, you know, physical transition between calm moving waters before they go into a canyon. So I don't think that that may be physically the starting point. I think that the physical starting point may be somewhere completely else in there. And I'm tiptoeing big time around, you know, my interpretation of what that correct starting point is. But I don't think it's, personally, I don't think warm waters halt or whatever warm waters halt is the correct starting point. I think that's a part of the clue. I think it's part of the clue that is trying to describe what the correct starting point is. And that's just my interpretation. And I'm really tap dancing around, you know, my answer to that, or my theory on that. Let's see what else I want to talk about. But I thought it was really interesting that Forrest Fenn said, you know, an 8-year-old man's not going to go make a trip, you know, into a canyon. And him saying into a canyon is basically stating, if you're going to go into a canyon, that means that you're not in the canyon, you're outside the canyon. And then you've got to go down into the canyon, right? He's not going to make those trips in and out. But if you're already in the canyon, right, you're not making trips out of it. So I think that that starting point is not outside the canyon. It may be in the canyon. It's different. I mean, I had this, the first time I had Dale Natzel on the show, like, geez, 2 years ago, on the flip side, you know, one of the first things he said was that, you know, I'm coming to the realization that, you know, years into this thing, that the whole time I've been going through the canyon. And he's not understanding that maybe I'm not supposed to be going through the canyon, that I'm actually supposed to be in the canyon. And it was just kind of an interesting conversation, a sidebar that we had with him. That's definitely interesting. And I'm just going to go back up and see if you guys got any chats in here. Richard says, Sean, too far to walk is relative, different for everyone. And if you really think about it, nowhere is too far to walk. You can walk any place. Yeah. Sure, Richard. It's completely subjective or relative, as you're saying, to each individual. You know, that what you think is too far to walk, Richard, it may be completely different than what I think, and they may be completely the same, but it is completely subjective. Again, no distance is too far to walk, like you said. You just have to put one foot down in front of the other and keep going. Until either it's just too far to walk and you fall over and you can't go no more, or, you know, whatever. So yeah, I agree with you on that, but we have to take it from the perspective of the architect. The architect is telling us, the readers of the poem, that the distance between, you know, whatever warm waters halt is and taking in the canyon down, you know, to wherever is too far to walk. That distance between whatever warm waters halt is to theoretically to put him below the home of Brown is just too far to walk for him. It may not be for you, may not be for me, but for him, an 80-year-old man, possibly carrying 20 pounds or whatever, it's just too far to walk. And he's kind of given us that, you know, possible interpretation in the preface of Too Far to Walk. And if you listen to the Moby Dickens interview, he says, when somebody asks him about the unintended clue and Too Far to Walk, and he says, well, if you've read the preface to my book, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what I think those people were talking about. And then he goes on to read the preface, which he talks about, the river distance from here to there being about 9 or 10 miles or whatever it was, is being too far to walk. However, he does end up stating that, that phrase too far to walk was kind of a metaphor for his life. And then he goes on to say, there's some things I've done in my life I'm not so proud of, and I'm completely paraphrasing off of memory, and you probably know what I'm talking about and go back and watch it. So again, Richard, you're right. I mean, it's completely subjective. We just don't know, what that is. But according to the architect, it is too far to walk. And again, it's like the meek. He says, from there, wherever that is, which I think theoretically could be the starting point, from there, it's no place for the meek. Now, meek, and I've said this before, is, by itself is an adjective. It is describing those people that are submissive or timid or whatever that. But even that is subjective. But when you put the definitive article, the, before that adjective meek, it is then talking about a group of people that are considered to be timid, meek, or obedient, or whatever else, or under somebody's thumb in a sense. But that is coming from the perspective of the author of the poem, just like the distance not far but too far to walk. So you got to ask yourself, who does Forrest Fenn thinks are people that are, meek? That's the question you got to ask yourself. So Richard, I know I've gone on that. Yeah, I mean, Richard, you're right. It could completely be a metaphor. Just going back, see if I see anything. Guys, if you have a question, put the @ sign at the flip side, because I have a hard time, catching anything. Jason says, you have to figure out where warm waters halt, but you can't figure out the correct where warm waters halt without saying begin it where warm waters halt alone. You need additional information. The poem. Yeah, I mean, Jason, you're right. And I think that's what Forrest Fenn has said. If you, I think his whole, what he was saying is like, if you try and bake a cake and you leave out a few ingredients, will, the end result be the same? No, it won't be the same. You've got to have all the ingredients in order to bake the cake, right? And I think that's why I don't believe that the whole entire clue or all the information we need to find the correct starting place where we're supposed to begin it is wholly encapsulated within where warm waters halt. I don't think that's all the information. I think you kind of have to separate begin it where from where from warm waters halt. Begin it where warm waters halt and take it in the canyon down, not far but too far to walk. I think there's a little separation in there, and that separation may be describing the region or whatever that is where the correct starting point encompasses in. And that may be hard for some people to wrap their heads around, and I'm okay with that, because I could be wrong. I'm not saying I'm right. It's just my interpretation. Cheers. And that's why I look at that and I go, okay, if some have correctly solved the first two clues, but that went right on past, I look at it and say the first two clues could be encompassing that whole second stanza. Then to me, it makes more sense, because when he says from there, it's no place for the meek, I view that as possibly either clue 3 or clue 4. Because if Forrest Fenn has said in the Columbia podcast audio that the first few clues are the first two stanzas, that which he read, then the third clue possibly, this is just possibly, could be the first stanza. I'm not saying it is, because some people think that, stanza 2 is 3 or 4 clues based on Forrest Fenn saying it sounds like 3 or 4. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying there's a difference between something sounding like and something definitively being something. I've had this whole conversation over on mysterious writings, or not mysterious writings, Hint of Riches and mysterious writings with people. There's a complete difference, because those people that think, there's no way the 9 sentences can be the 9 clues will always go back to that and say, well, Forrest Fenn said the second stanza sounds like 3 or 4. I can't definitively say they're wrong, but they can't definitively say that that is accurate, because saying something sounds like something is not definitive proof that it actually is. It just sounds like it. That's not definitive. And some people think that is, and they hang their hat on that. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I can't definitively say they're wrong. I'm just saying you have to look at the flip side. You have to look at the other side of it. And I have a really hard time taking people seriously who speak in absolutes about things Forrest Fenn has not definitively said as a fact. I just cannot take some people seriously. I want to have conversations with them, but when they tell me, look, that's 3 or 4 clues, and the first one is a hint. Okay, if that's what you believe, I'll move on. We can agree to disagree. But I keep getting bashed by them, every time that I bring it up, as I get on that soapbox. Yeah, I think, Jason, you're right. I think there is a symbiotic relationship between all the clues. They do work together. I'm just reading some of your guys' stuff here, find something we can talk about. Silver Fox. Silver Fox says, Ryan says, or the waters take it in the canyon down. There are many ways to approach the poem. Yes. And this is an interesting conversation, Ryan, because the poem says, begin it where warm waters halt and take it in the canyon down. Now, there's no comma between halt and. So it's a complete thought. Now, if there would have been a comma after halt, I would really kind of focus more on, what warm waters halt is. Or if Forrest Fenn had said, begin it where warm waters halt and take it in a canyon down, then there would be more focus on trying to figure out what warm waters halt is. But because there's no comma between those, it then becomes a continuous thought. So yes, I agree. It's not us, the searcher, or Forrest Fenn actually taking it in the canyon down, meaning walking, physically following the clues, from the first clue, begin at where warm waters halt, and then take it in the canyon down. It's the waters. Again, I think there's a different, definition between waters plural and water singular. Waters in the sense is talking about kind of like a body of water, like the waters of the Nile, the waters of the Pacific Ocean, the waters of a specific lake like Lake Tahoe. But when you're talking about water singular, you're probably talking about a small body of water, or something that like a pool, the water in your pool in your backyard. That's a single body of water that water doesn't come in and then exit in the normal geographical sense, or geological sense of a stream feeding into that pool. But waters, in that plural sense, is talking about like a continuous body of water that is fluid, that has water coming in and out of it and moving, if you can make sense of that. So yeah, it is the waters, in my opinion, that were once warm, that have made that transition and then going into a canyon. That's why there's many places where warm waters halt in the Rocky Mountains, because the Rocky Mountains has many canyons, and most of them are north of Santa Fe. There's not that many canyons that are south of Santa Fe, geologically speaking, in the Rocky Mountains, right? Cheers. So yeah, I get what you're saying, Ryan, and I'm right there with you on it. Yeah, Rodney, you said in the wood, and that just trips up in my mind a little bit, because there's a lot of people that believe, and I'm not saying they're wrong, that the clues only exist between begin and cease, because Forrest Fenn has said the first clue is begin at warm waters halt, And in the VOA interview, he said, you know, when you get to the last or to the ninth clue, look down because you're where the treasure chest is. Well, they interpret that to mean look quickly down is the ninth clue. So then the clues only exist between begin and cease. But yet you've got two more stanzas after that, and plus you got the first stanza. And then in the very last sentence of that poem, he says, if you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold. So in the wood, is that not a clue? Because in that Jennifer London interview with Forrest, when she's talking with him about the 9 clues, you know, she said, hey, you know, in these 9 clues, you know, there's references to water, there's references to the House of Brown, and then Forrest interrupts and says there's references to wood. Is wood not an important word in that poem, in the wood? I think it is. But yet that information or in the wood is not contained within the words begin and cease. So how does that make sense with those people that believe the clues only exist between those 2 words, begin and cease? Again, unless the clues, as we see them in the poem, in that consecutive order in the poem, are not the same order that we follow them when solved. Because if the first clue is begin at where warm waters halt, that's not the first line in the poem. But that's the first thing we've got to figure out before we ever leave home. We've got to have that one nailed down, or might as well stay home and play canasta, right? So there may be a chronological order to the clues in the poem once you understand them, or quote unquote follow them in the figurative sense, versus how we see them in the order in the poem, or how we read them. When we read the poem, we read them, you know, as I have gone alone in there, right? That's the first line we read, but we're told that's not the first clue. You know, the first clue is this. Then again, I question people, well, in what, you know, definition are we to take the word first? Is it in the literal or the figurative sense? Literal as in like a step-by-step, not so much step-by-step, but, you know, in a specific order. You know, there's different ways to look at that. You know, the first clue that we read may be the first stanza, but it's not the first one we got to figure out, right? Because that may not tell us the location. Now, there's plenty of people that think, well, if the first clue is begin at where warm waters halt, then the first stanza's got to tell us the correct region where warm waters halt is. I mean, you've got, you know, Mike Cowlings the other day that said, you know, if somebody told me that I needed to find something in these four states, then the first thing I need to figure out is what state it's in, right? So a lot of people think that first stanza is then going to narrow it down and tell us specifically what state that warm waters halt resides within. But then I go, wait a minute. Forrest Fenn never started out by telling us the treasure's in one of 4 states. He never said that. He started out by telling us it's somewhere in the mountains north of Santa Fe. And people were thinking that could be, you know, the Cascade Mountains. It could be the Appalachian Mountains. It could be the Sierra Nevada Mountains, because all those are technically north of Santa Fe, right? You know, they're way off in the distance, but technically those are north of Santa Fe. But then Forrest Fenn then was like, okay, well, I need to kind of, you know, focus these people. And then he said the Rocky Mountains. Okay. And then he even focused it even more and then gave us the 4 search states after he, you know, took out Nevada and Idaho, because there's only a small portion of the Rocky Mountains that are in those states. So he didn't give us the 4 states right off the bat. So how can you say that, you know, you first got to tell us what state it's in? We didn't even know that. And my point is, if you can find or you can identify the correct starting location, that from there you proceed, then wouldn't the state be obvious at that point? If you knew that correct geographical representation, it's not on the fucking moon. It's either in one of those 4 states, is it not? Then you would know that. It's no different than the people that think that Forrest Fenn that the put in is actually where we're supposed to park our car. Come on, guys. You know, that kind of stuff will be obvious once you know the correct place that you're supposed to start, that you can proceed from there. Then you're like, oh, I guess I need to park my car here, and I guess I got to drive my ass from here to Montana, because that's what I deem as the correct starting point, right? Why would he waste, words in that poem, 166, and tell him where you got to park your car, or you need to go to New Mexico, or you need to go to Montana? He would just tell you where you need to start, and then you would figure that on your own. If not, he'd definitely be calling the field and saying you're not worthy and you're not going to earn it, if you think he had to tell you that. Jeez. Davia, what's wrong with my shirt? Well, I don't understand why Brian Gates is saying don't let Davio see that shirt. I guess I'm not paying attention to the whole conversation. What are you guys talking about? I love sometimes when I watch other people's shows is mess around with the chat room. So I know you guys, a lot of times you ignore me. Rodney says, oh, at the flip side, that was a continuation message I deleted. Okay. I don't know what you're saying there. Green Sun says, do a fire in your fireplace, please, and read it backwards. Okay. Anagram says, at the flip side, they didn't solve the first two clues. They got there by accident. Yeah, and isn't that kind of what he says, Anagram? I don't know if you're still in here. That was an old stating, because he says they didn't, I don't think that they knew it. I think that they just happened there, kind of like you say, by accident. It was, what did he say in one other post, that it was kind of an aberration? They arrived there as an aberration, not knowing the significance of where they were, because maybe they just associated it with a keyword or something in the poem and just arrived there by accident. It was just an aberration. So yeah, if they had solved it, then they would know. They never would have left. But again, you can't say that you solved anything. Again, you won't know that you got the first clue correct, according to Forrest, until you solve, or you find the treasure, right? So there's not really a solve. Again, you can't have a correct solve unless you can knowingly go within several steps of the treasure chest, according to Forrest, right? But how can you knowingly go to that place unless you recover the treasure? It's this catch-22, right? So yeah, I don't think that they solved them, like you said, because they didn't know it. He knows that they kind of solved it, that they figured it out, but they didn't know it. He's like, well, not close enough. You didn't know it. And alas, Dame Fortune never spun her wheel to lure him back again, right? So yeah, I get exactly what you're saying there, Anagram. I agree 100%. I mean, and again, what has Forrest Fenn said in Too Far to Walk? I warned the path would not be direct for those who had no certainty in the location beforehand, but sure for the one who did. And I think that certainty, that word certainty, gets people so wrapped up in believing, okay, there is confirmations in there. And this is a big debate I have. A lot of people think that there are confirmations in there because of that kind of word, that you're going to have certainty. But certainty can also be a firm conviction that something is the case. Conviction is no different than faith. You can have faith in God, but you have no proof in him. And that's the whole basis of faith. It's just confidence and belief and certainty in something, but you have no proof. That's the whole basis of faith. I have a lot of faith and firm conviction and confidence that my solve, or at least my general solve, is correct, but I have no proof of that. And I'm wise enough to know that because I have no proof in that I have no confirmation. But I have a lot of, you call it certainty or confidence, and a lot of coincidences out there that line up that give me confidence, but it doesn't give me no confirmation. Others disagree, and that's okay. I know I've kicked that horse a lot of times. What else do you guys want to talk about? We got time. Yeah, Anagram, exactly. They're in the right place, but they just don't know it. And golly, if we just knew where they were, we would all, maybe we'd have this thing down. And I guess is how do we know, and that's, golly, that's what's such a fun thing about this. It's such the mystery. Colorado says, at the flip side, does the term "from there" tell you to proceed, or does it mean to stand there and observe? I guess you could look at it in different ways, Brad. I kind of look at it and go, it might be a little bit of both. From there, wherever that point is, it's no place for the meek. Now, does that mean that you're actually moving, or you're actually just observing? And that's a good point. From there, it is no place for the meek. So you're not moving yet. You're just observing, okay, if I'm at the correct starting point, wherever that may be in the Rocky Mountains, and I'm looking around, okay, which direction is no place for the meek? Could that just be a cardinal direction, or is that describing something that is, this is the direction you're supposed to go, because this is the area that is no place for the meek? That's a good point. I have my idea on that. Again, guys, me, I believe that no place for the meek is potentially a river crossing. And again, Forrest Fenn has never eliminated, potential water crossings. The only thing he's ever said is, the treasure's not underwater. He's never ruled it out. And there was something else the other day, cheers to you guys, that was said on the Calazars channel the other day by Mike, and they were really hammering this home, and I understand where they're going with this, but they were saying, have we not benefited from Forrest Fenn being in the chase? Have we not learned a lot? Has our safety not been improved by Forrest Fenn being in the chase? Are we better off, or are we safer because of Forrest Fenn responding? And I somewhat agree and disagree with that. And here's why. And this, I know Forrest Fenn does not like me talking about this because he's told me, but we had no deaths until 2016 in this chase. So from October of 2010 all the way to January, February-ish of 2016, nobody had passed that we know of. Somebody could have been driving to their search location, got in an accident. Okay, you could drive out of your driveway tomorrow and get ran over. Hope that doesn't happen to anybody. Just saying, it could happen. The most dangerous thing we do is get behind the wheel of our car. But we had no deaths up until that point. And then Forrest Fenn had to react to that. There was nothing that I can recall, and I can be completely wrong. There was no proactive things that Forrest Fenn was doing to try and keep us searchers safe in there, other than saying, don't go where a 79 or 80-year-old man couldn't go carrying 20 pounds of gold, or a 42-pound chest, I think is what he actually said, which isn't true because he split it up. But there was something that happened just prior to Randy passing, and that was a weekly word that came out like in November or December of 2015 that said, if you know precisely where it is, you can probably retrieve it in any weather. Well, is that something that kind of spurred Randy on? Because Randy may have had so much confidence that the treasure was located in Bandelier National Park that he was going to retrieve it in any weather. Now, Randy's got to be a person responsible for his own actions, and Forrest Fenn should not be held accountable for that. I don't agree that he is, but was Forrest Fenn kind of spurring on that kind of, irresponsible actions by saying, if you knew precisely where it is, you could probably retrieve it any weather? Well, I don't think you can know precisely where it is. I think you can get within, several steps of the treasure if you have a correct solve, but you're not going to know precisely where it is. So there's no sense in going anywhere. That's just the way I interpret. But maybe Randy and other searchers didn't interpret it that way. So, Forrest Fenn really hasn't done any kind of proactive things prior to that point. Everything has kind of been reactive. He's reacting to things that have happened. He reacted to Randy. He reacted to Jeff Murphy by saying you don't have to cross any steep precipices. He reacted to Paris Wallace's death. The treasure's not underwater. It's not in the Rio Grande, gorge area. He's reacting to all those things. But the one question I asked him in my, to cross or not to cross question was, hey, Forrest, in the path that you hid the treasure, from where you parked your car to where you hid the treasure, did you have to ford a waterway? And that question was never answered directly, either by email or openly. So if he's trying to be reactive and trying to then again be proactive, then you would think that he would eliminate that by saying, look, guys, you don't need to go into water. Okay. But instead, he goes into this whole thing about waders and the correct waders to wear and all this other crap. So he hasn't definitively eliminated the potential of a water crossing, but he has not definitively said that there is a water crossing. Okay, so it's you got to ask yourself, okay, well, somewhere in the middle, is there? Whether that path that you have to cross is one that you physically have to cross, or you can go around it. Again, like I've said, there's more than one way to skin a cat, guys. You can find any way you can go. But again, what did Forrest Fenn say? The path that he took from his car to the treasure chest was the most direct route. So was the most direct route he took potentially crossing a river? And back to Colorado Brado's question, I seriously believe that no place for the meek is that potential water crossing in the path. Can't prove it. I just think it. Cheers. Going down. Brian Gates, at the flip side, stanza 3 is a general description of the right area. Stanza 3, from there, it's no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. There'll be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and water high. Yeah, that could definitely be a description of the area, because hasn't Forrest Fenn kind of said, there's been many people within 500 feet, and, several within 200 feet, right? I mean, if they figured out the first two clues, or a lot of people have figured out, are they arriving at 500 feet? Or there's many people that have been within 500 feet. So that other stanza could be describing that area. Sure, they could be very close to that area and describing it. Absolutely. And again, I think that's, if several have figured out the first two clues, but then went right on past, I really look at that third stanza where it says from there, it's no place for the meek. I kind of see that as a transition, and how stanza 1 is talking about potentially, as I have gone alone in there. Is it Forrest Fenn going alone into that place that is no place for the meek? Is that the area that is isolated? Is that an area that this is a place that a person would not normally go, unless they are not meek, right? I mean, a person would not normally go there. Maybe to Forrest Fenn, most people are meek. Again, that's where I personally see that transition, and why I'm such a big part of why I'm such an advocate of the sentences possibly being the 9 clues, because then it starts to make more sense to me, that transition between clue 3 and 4, that people are walking right on past it, because they're walking past what could potentially be that third or fourth clue and going, well, I'm not going there. Well, they were meek. They went on past it. They kept going down a trail in a different direction. That's kind of how I see it. Edward Owens, you said you can never discount anything. You must be open to any and all possibilities. I agree. I think there's, Edward, I think there's some things Forrest Fenn has definitively said, like, the treasure is above 5,000 and below 10,200 feet. That's a very definitive statement. So if you believe the treasure is, at 4,999 feet, unless the earth has dropped a couple of feet, you're probably wrong. If you think the treasure is above 10,200 feet, you're probably wrong. If you think the treasure, Forrest Fenn has definitively said it's in one of 4 search states. If you think the treasure is not in one of those, you're wrong. I mean, he's definitively given us those parameters. But anything else that fits within those things is still possible. It's no different than, I think, the 9 sentences or the 9 clues. Forrest Fenn has never definitively said that the sentences are not the clues. He's said things that would make you believe that they're not, right? But that's not definitive. You know, he's never said, a lot of people think that the first stanza is nothing more than a hint. He's never definitively said it's not a hint, right? So it's still possible. Absolutely. Flip side, what is your opinion on it? Well, it is, I can't remember what they call it, an antecedent. I always get that word wrong, but it is something, you know, that word is used to describe something that is easily identified or already known in a sense. And it says, begin it where warm waters halt. It may actually be the starting point. A lot of people think it's your quest. A lot of people think it's the waters. A lot of people think it's this. I think it's simply the starting point. Begin your quest, or begin, you know, it where, and then from there. I mean, two different things, where and there. So he's saying, begin it where warm waters halt, and take it in the canyon down, not far, but too far to walk. Put in below the home of Brown. Then from there. So I think, you know, everything prior to from there, Brian, might be describing what it is, physically our starting point. You know, there's a lot of people that think that, you know, stanza 2 is 3 or 4 clues, right? And they say, well, clue 1 is begin at warm waters halt. Clue 2 is canyon down. Clue 3 is not far, but too far to walk. And then clue 4 is, you know, put in below the home of Brown. And they say, because it's kind of directional clues. Well, can you not look at put in below the home of Brown as being also multiple clues? In a sense, you could say put in is kind of like a nautical term, as in to put into port, right? And then below is actually a direction, at either at a lower elevation or south of something. And then the home of could be something altogether. And then Brown, something else. You could be looking at 5 different things in there. It could be one thing, or it could be all the information for something else. I mean, there's a lot going on there in stanza 2. I mean, could it be 4 clues? Sure, absolutely it could be. It sounds like it to Forrest Fenn, right, is what he says, and he kind of laughs about it, but that's not definitive proof that it isn't. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm just saying I interpret it differently. But it, at least the first it in the poem, to me is the correct starting point. That's just the way I look at it. Who's being sassy, Silver Fox? Ooh, bug on me. Brian Gates, flip side. Begin it, take it is important in my own person. Sure. Oh, we're going on like an hour here or so. I don't know when we started this, 58 minutes, yeah. We're not going to go much longer here, guys. Richard says, at the flip side, here's my take on part of the last stanza. The word you isn't about us. In other words, the line isn't saying we have to be brave and in the wood. See if I can make sense of this, Richard. I look at the poem as being written as a conversation between 2 people. That conversation between the author and the finder. So it's, you know, Forrest Fenn talking to a single person. That is you who is reading the poem. So it's your creek, it's his treasures bold. It's, you know, it's his conversation back and forth where he says, hear me all and listen good. A lot of people will think all is everybody, like he's making this large proclamation to everybody in the search community. No, he's talking to you, the reader. So when he's saying all, I think he's talking about everything. So hear me all. So hear everything I say and listen good. And those people that think that the clues only, you know, exist between begin and cease are ignoring that. You know, when he's sitting here saying, you know, in conclusion, so hear me all, hear everything I say, especially what I'm about to say, and listen good, your effort will be worth the cold. If you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold. Again, you. He's talking individually to the single person that's reading that. It's that conversation. It's just a private conversation between two people. You're reading it, even though there's 500,000 some odd people or whatever reading this poem. Just my interpretation, Richard. Richard Bertram says, at the flip side, what do you think about the answers I already know? I is a noun and is not the right. Oh, that's interesting. I is a noun. Well, it's a pronoun, not necessarily a noun, but I guess you could say a pronoun is part of the noun family, right? Well, one thing, Richard, stanza 5 to me is a, what we call a hypophora. And a hypophora is where a writer poses a question and then immediately answers it. And there's several different reasons for that. One is to try and take a discussion in a completely different direction. One is to pose questions to the reader that they may not have thought of and then kind of answer it. It's a rhetorical device. In a normal rhetorical question, you ask a question but never answer it because there's no real answer to it. But in a hypophora, it's where a writer or a speaker poses a question, then immediately answers it for effect. And it's either to take a discussion in a completely different direction or pose thoughts to the reader they haven't thought of. And it's kind of like that whole periodic words where Forrest Fenn says, to answer some questions and save others from being asked. I did follow the clues in the poem when I hid the treasure, although I hid the treasure before the poem was complete. And is he kind of answering that in that hypophora? So why is it I must go and leave my trove for all to seek? The answers I already know. I have done it, tired, now I'm weak. Is that I have done it, tired, now I'm weak, answering why he must go and leave his trove? Because he followed the clues in the poem, because he had it all figured out. He just didn't have it written yet, or completed, like he says in that periodic words. So I just find that whole thing interesting, and I'm going down that whole thought process about that hypophora in the poem. And again, it's a rhetorical device which speaks to grammar and everything else, in my opinion. Again, confirmation bias, tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmations of one's pre-existing beliefs. So I see that and see it as a confirmation that grammar and everything else is important. Doesn't mean it is. Anyway, guys. So again, and kind of in retrospect, and this is probably going to get a lot of people fired up, I don't think Warm Waters Halt is the correct starting point. And matter of fact, I'd come on the record and say, I don't even think it's that important. I think what's important in there is the rest of that sentence. I think we're missing it out. I'm not going to call it a complete red herring, but in some ways it is. It's not how important something is, it's how important Forrest Fenn can make it think it is. And he's being kind of a cunning fox in a way, in my opinion. He's not telling us all of the truth. He's not lying to us. He's just not telling it all the truth. Begin it where? That is the correct starting point is the where. And then from there, we can proceed. That's all we're trying to find is the correct starting point. And I kind of envision it as like a, like I've said in that whole, is the poem a map to the treasure video I did? We're trying to find the X on the map, which we think is where the treasure chest is. But what if there is two X's, our starting point and our end point? And is that not kind of like what Forrest Fenn did in Cynthia's book, where he put the two X's? We've got to have our starting point. That's where we first start. And then we've got our end point. Begin it where, and from there, it's no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. The end is getting closer. It's within sight. It's within view. It's, it's approaching. That's just how I think of it. If we have an end of a rainbow, don't we have to have a beginning of a rainbow? So I think we've got to have our starting point and our ending point. And I think from there is very key in that poem, because it's indicating that, you know, what information is the embodiment of what from there represents. And I think I said this in a private message chatting with Sasha on Facebook, that if Jason and Sasha were to give me instructions on how to get to their home in Kansas, you know, they wouldn't tell me, hey, you got to open up your garage door, back your car out, you know, make a right and go down to this street or whatever. No, they wouldn't do that, right? They would tell me, you know, get off on exit 243 off of I-40 and wherever, Kansas. They would tell me there. And then from there, they would say, okay, make a right on the exit ramp, go down 5 lights, make a left at the KFC, you know, or whatever else. Because each and every one of us has a completely different starting point at our home, right? We all have different starting points, but he's trying to get us to the correct starting point where we got to go. So from our home, it's all going to be different directions. He's not going to tell each and every one of us, you back out of your garage and go there. He's going to give us the correct starting point. And then once we know that correct starting point, then the state will be obvious, and where we need to park our car will be obvious. Should be, at least. I don't know. I can't wrap my head around the fact that people don't understand. I'm not saying you don't understand it, but some people, I just don't think understand that. And not saying I'm right and they're wrong. I'm just saying that I have a hard time wrapping my head around that, I guess. Anyway, guys, I know I've rambled on enough. With all the troubles and stuff we've had tonight, I appreciate you guys sticking around. And I know it's a late one. It's, you know, 1:30 in the morning for probably some of you guys, wherever you're at. Bill, how are you doing, buddy? Yeah, Graham, Richard Bertram. Let me pick a random thing out of my book of secrets here and read it to you guys. A lot of this stuff comes from the old, you know, some of the shows we did and stuff like that. Going way back to even the doing the weekend updates and stuff. Let me just see if I can find something out here. Oh, it was me. This goes back to poetry versus grammar. And I was having a conversation with Man Alone, who had said that the poem has nothing to do with grammar. You know, that it's all about poetry and blah, 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 and everything else. And then, you know, I said, okay, then why do the words halt and walk not rhyme? You know, Forrest Fenn really worked on this thing for 15 years, and he only used a poem because he needed an avenue to present the clues. And he worked on 15 years, then why wouldn't he take the time to get that to rhyme? And he said he was limited by his ability as why those words didn't rhyme. Well, what ability was that? Was that, you know, his ability to try and get us precisely to the correct starting point? Or was it his ability, you know, to make it, you know, a poem that rhymed? So, I mean, I think that was my whole point. And to Man Alone was trying to converse with him, is that, you know, you can't say that with absolutes, that this is just a poem and it's not about grammar. Because if it was just about poetry, he would have found a way to make those things rhyme, no matter what. You know, it wouldn't, you know, wouldn't have mattered to him. I don't care if people find it or not. You know, I think he does care that somebody finds it. And Forrest Fenn said, the poem in my book is something that I changed over and over again. When you read that poem, it looks just like simple words there, but I guarantee you I worked on that thing. I felt like an architect drawing that poem, you know. And Forrest Fenn has said, or was questioned, is there a specific reason why halt and walk are the only words that do not follow the rhyme scheme? And Forrest Fenn said, yes, I was limited by my ability. You know, he was limited by his ability to make those things rhyme. I can find something else in here. I like hanging out with you guys and just chatting. Oh, here's a good one. This is a note I wrote in here. Wow, almost exactly 2 years ago. This was from April 19th, 2018. I wrote, "What if stanzas 3 and 4 are to be viewed from the perspective of standing at the starting point?" That's interesting. That's what I wrote. Okay, so what if stanzas 3 and 4 are to be viewed from the perspective of standing at the starting point? So, from there, it's no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. I think somebody said that in here. I think that was Colorado Brado that said, what if that is supposed to be just viewed? Yeah, so that's something, yeah, I was kind of thinking that 2 years ago. And I said in here, it seems like the third stanza is describing which way we are to be facing if we are in the right spot or starting point. No physical movement from that spot. Just from there, it is no place for the meek. So then we're facing in the correct direction. I mean, shit, that's exactly what we were talking about, Colorado, if you're still in here. So yeah, I mean, if you're standing at the correct starting point, then maybe stanzas 3 would make more sense. And that's possibly why those that had solved the first 2 clues went right on past the other 7. Maybe because they didn't anagram back to you, only arrived there as an aberration, didn't understand the significance of where they were, but not also that, they didn't really fully comprehend the 3rd clue. They just arrived there as an aberration of whatever information prior to that 3rd clue, whatever that is. So they get there, they don't understand clue 3, and they walk right on past it. Like kind of Forrest Fenn said in that Julius Brighton interview, right? Several people arrive within 500 feet. I think, people have gotten within a couple hundred feet. They figure the first 2 clues, but they don't get the 3rd and the 4th, and they go right on past the treasure. Again, if you're standing at what you believe is a correct starting point, then maybe clue 3 will make more sense. I don't know. There's something I was writing back then. Okay, here's one. If he said there is no paddle up your creek, then the word paddle would then be a noun to mean an oar or instrument used to move a boat through the water. But what if paddle isn't a noun? What if it's a verb? Right? You got to look at these things. Different words give you, William, how are you? I see your question there. Just give you different meanings. William, flip side, Mexico, ad Forrest said he sees animals if he was standing where the chest is. Yeah, could be. I mean, if you stand long enough, you may see animals. I mean, unless you're in a zoo and the animals are confined. I've been in my location, seen a lot of signs of animals. I've actually found a dead animal in my area at one point in time. But yeah, I mean, birds, you could see chipmunks, you could see squirrels, you could see foxes, you could see deer. I mean, you could see all kinds of things, sure. The one thing I always wanted to question, William, is would you see water? I think other people have asked that too, and I've never heard Forrest Fenn ever directly ask that or him directly answer a question like that. Cheers. Jack, I see what you said. Yeah, at the flip side, don't discount any stanzas. Absolutely. And I don't think, I've said this sometimes before and maybe a little bit facetiously, that, those people that think that the clues only exist between begin and cease, then ignore stanzas 1, 5, and 6. And maybe that's a wrong way of saying it. I don't think people are ignoring whole parts of the poem. I just think that they don't see them as the clues. A lot of people see them as just hints that are going to help them with the clues. Now, I can't say that they're wrong, because at least they're looking at the bigger picture. They're encompassing the whole poem. But I just don't understand why they can't then go, well, they could be clues. There's people that go, it's not a clue. Well, could you be mistaken? Just as you say that I'm mistaken, could you not be mistaken? I think so. And Jack, hasn't Forrest Fenn said we can't ignore any of the nouns in that poem? Well, there's like upwards of 10 or 11 nouns found within stanzas 1, 5, and 6, right? You've got treasures, which can be considered a noun. You've got Secret, which can be considered a noun. Riches, which is only a noun. You could even consider the word in to be a noun, as I've gone alone in there. You know, and then you've got the fifth stanza. You've got trove, which is a noun. You've got answers, which is a noun. In stanza 6, you've got cold, can be considered a noun. You've got, you know, wood that can be considered a noun. I mean, there's more in there, I know, just off the top of my head, I'm throwing these things out there. So are we ignoring those nouns? I'm not saying people are ignoring them, but then they're not considering them clues. And then when Forrest Fenn was asked by K-Pro and Mike in their interview with him for their documentary about the whole key word, Forrest Fenn finally capitulates and says, yeah, there's one word in the poem that is more important than the others, right? That is more important than some of the others, but you got to have them all. Okay, you got to have all the words. You can't ignore some of them. So if you're considering that they only exist between begin and cease, and that's the consecutive chronological order that only falls within there, and everything else outside is not, then you're ignoring some of those words that are important, that are less than that one that is important more than the others. But then you're also ignoring 10 or 11 nouns in there, you know, as potentially not being clues. That may be expensive folly, in my opinion. Let me see if I find some other notes in here. One thing I said in here, you know, it's clearly possible the number of clues is not really important. But then the question then becomes, why does Forrest Fenn even mention that there are 9 clues? I mean, why does he even tell us that? And I personally look at that first line before the poem as possibly being one of the subtle clues that are sprinkled in the stories. And why I say that is that Forrest Fenn has told us numerous of times that the hints will only help you with the clues. You know, the poem will take you to the treasure, but the book itself will not. So the book by itself is not going to lead you to the treasure. That's obvious. But the poem can. So the hints can only help you with the clues. But I guess the real question is how do the subtle hints help us? Well, when I look at him telling us that there are 9 clues in the poem, I look at that as something that could help us with the clues, because to me, that helps me definitively identify what the clues may be. Because the only thing in the poem that can definitively be counted to equate to the number 9 are the sentences. And if they are contiguous, as Forrest Fenn has been quoted as saying in secondhand information that the clues are contiguous, then they are bordering and touching. And the sentences are. But if you think that the clues are individual phrases in the poem, an individual phrase like begin at where warm waters halt being the first clue, and then you may think that the second clue is take it in the canyon down, but then not far but too far to walk is not a clue, and the third clue is put in below the home of Brown, those are not touching. You've got separation in between them. You've got several words in between that you're saying are not clues, then they're not contiguous. Sure, they're still consecutive because there's one after the other, but then they're not contiguous because they're not touching. The only thing that is contiguous within the poem that is touching throughout it are the sentences and the words that are going through there. So I think that, you know, him telling us that there are 9 clues may be a subtle hint that helps us to identify what the clues are. And if the clues really are the sentences, then it also clues us in that grammar, word meaning, even punctuation, everything else, may be key and helpful in figuring this thing out. Can't prove it. It seems logical to this brain of mine, but that doesn't make it right, guys. It doesn't. There's times I'd love to just say, you're all fucking wrong and I'm right. I'm the lead searcher. I'm the lead dog, everything else. You know, that's just not true. It's not, because I don't have the treasure. Can't say that. Yeah, Jack, there's no shortcuts. What did Forrest Fenn say? You know, no one has any secret information that for the starting point. You know, it's in the poem for all to see. Okay, so you can't shortcut it. You can't. What did he say when somebody else asked him? He said there's subtle hints scattered throughout the book, and I'm completely get this wrong. But will those hints somehow tell us which Homer Brown or whatever else is correct? And he said no. He didn't do that. So you can't figure out what is the correct starting point by information outside the poem. All the information you need to find the correct starting point is wholly contained within the poem. Again, it was vital that no one share the information about the treasure's location. Two can keep a secret if one of them is dead. He's not going to put the information that gives you the correct starting point, in my opinion, outside of the poem. Those hints are only there to help you with the clues, not help you give you the answer to the correct starting point. They're only there to help you possibly identify the clues and understand what, you know, how to decipher the clues. Anagram, I am Spartacus. Yes, I just started watching a new show on Netflix about Troy and the whole thing. I can't remember the name of it. I watched like the first 3 or 4 episodes of it. Pretty good. I like it. Go back and watch it. Another show I just started watching. We get on this rabbit hole. Thanks, Anagram. You did this. Another show I just started watching is called. Oh dang it! What the hell? Name of it? Oh, it's kind of like I almost hate to call it a teenager movie, but I gotta look this up. But it's about these teenagers. One, you know, he loses his father. He goes missing, and it's about them trying to find a shipwreck, and it's kind of interesting. Somebody will probably get it really quick. Outer Banks. That's what it's called. It's called The Outer Banks. It's kind of a young adult kind of show, but you know, we're all in the treasure hunt and love this stuff. It's kind of interesting. If you guys are looking for something to Netflix and chill, I think there's only 1 season of it, about 5 episodes into it. It's kind of interesting. You might like it. Go watch that. Kind of good. Jack, flip side, when the chest is found, there will be only one. There can be only one. Was that Highlander, right? Jack, yeah. Yeah, there will be only one. And how can we, there's a lot of people that want to say that, you know, the eventual finder will have only been able to find this treasure by using the hints in the book. Really? You know, who are we, you know, the non-finders, to question the eventual finder of how they figured this thing out? You know, I've said this jokingly many times. You know, the eventual finder could take a jar of peanut butter and throw it up against the wall and say that's what told them the correct search state. Who are we to say they were wrong? They found it, right? I don't think that's going to be the way they found it, but who are we to say they're wrong? The flip side, your thoughts on why he called it Troy pounds and not just pounds. I think it has something to do with just gold. And he's probably been educated in that well beyond what I know about it. But my grandfather was what do you call it? He was a coin collector, and there's a term for that. But he was very adamant about, you know, troy ounces and talking about silver. He wasn't really into gold that much, but into silver coins and everything else. So there's something that's very specific about it. But that, William, interestingly enough, maybe Forrest Fenn again being so structured and making sure he gets things right and very educated. Again, Scrapbook 107. I think that scrapbook really talks about, you know, the military man that Forrest Fenn is. You know, a lot of people look at that picture, the first picture in the scrapbook where it shows the phone cord, it's all twisted up, and he talks about, you know, why is it people can walk past this thing and, you know, see this thing twisted up and not fix it? It annoys the crap out of him, right? And then he shows a picture of the silverware drawer, and he's like, am I the only one that thinks about these things? And he reorganizes it. And then the last picture is what? Of the pen cap, you know, with the felt pen with the cap off. It shows the $5 bill with the dog ear on it. It shows the envelope with the stamp askewed, none of the writing justified. All these things have got to be things that annoys a person who is structured, that is military dress right dress, that expects things to be in proper order, which really speaks about why he considers himself an architect writing that poem, because it does have structure. Again, these are just how my brain works. Doesn't mean it's right. Can't prove it. I just love that kind of thought process going down that. Hey, Bill, what are you saying? Bill Gorman, Forrest is taking it with him. What makes you think you can find the treasure before he dies? Yeah, you're right. I mean, maybe there's some kind of mechanism we don't understand. This is the one thing we haven't thought about, Bill, that you know, we may not be able to find this thing until he passes. I don't know. There could be something to that, Bill. Sure. Because I can says, at the flip side, can I get a jar of peanut butter right? Where's that magic jar of peanut butter we could throw up and tell us the right state? I mean, I think if we, even if Forrest Fenn did narrow this thing down to 2 search states, we would still be arguing, you know, that it's in this state or in that. We'd have no consensus. We can't even come to a consensus on what the 9 clues are, you know, let alone a freaking search state. William, at the flip side, no, we already went over that one. Anagram says, I started watching Outer Banks, but it didn't hold my attention. Yeah, it's fine. It kind of did mine a little bit, you know, I like it. It's a little different. But I don't know if you're watching that other one about, you know, Spartacus and Troy and the whole Helena Troy saga. It's pretty good. There's some good actors in it. I think it's interesting. There was another one I watched that you guys might be interested in. And again, it's from Netflix. It might be a younger teen kind of movie, but I found it interesting. It's called The Letter to the King. If you're interested in something, I think it's 5 or 6 episodes long. It's kind of a good watch. It's about some young kids that are trying to be knighted, and then they're passed a letter that is supposed to be delivered to the king about you know, some attacks that are going on, and it's just kind of interesting and kind of a Lord of the Rings type of feel to it. If you're looking for something that was kind of interesting, I watched. Believe it or not, guys, I don't sit on the forums and watch YouTube channels all the time. I play with my kids. I watch shows. I built a chicken coop. That was fun. Doing a garden. Do a lot of other things too. Anagram says, better call Saul and Killing Eve. Yeah, I really couldn't get into. I watched Breaking Bad, of course, but I couldn't get into Better Call Saul. I look at it like the area of all 4 states till you have where warm water's halt. Yeah, I mean, you can't rule out anything until you nail it down. Once you nail it down, I think you'll know what is the correct state. That's a big reason why I don't say what state I'm searching in, other than a state of confusion. Well, guys, we're coming up on an hour and a half here. I appreciate you guys hanging out tonight. Again, I mentioned to you guys, I do have a Facebook group. We have like 27 members in there right now, kind of a small, tight-knit group. Not everybody of those 27 really participates so much. I think we've got maybe about 10 people that really communicate consistently within the group. But we were talking within the group tonight that we want to keep this group pretty small. So I've committed to maximizing the number of people that are in this group. Right now, like I said, we have 27. Not all of them are communicating. So I may go through there and do a purge a little bit and drop some people versus those people that really are communicating and participating. And then I'm going to cap that number. The group and I are going to come up with a number, whether that number is 25 or 50. It's going to be a very small number. It's not going to be a group of 500 people or 3,000 people like some of these groups have. I want this to be a really good, tight-knit group of people that are communicating. if you're interested in being part of this group, I suggest, you go and request to be a part of it. And then I'm going to do a purge. And then at that point, I'm not going to let any more people come in. And if I do let somebody else come in, it'll be by a committee. I will say, hey, look, we've had such and such people that haven't been really participating. We're going to drop a couple people. We've got 5 people that are wanting to be part of it. Let's vote on who we want to have come in this. And trust me, guys, I'm not trying to create a group that is a group of people that are a bunch of bobbleheads. I don't want a bunch of people in there that are agreeing with me or agreeing with everybody else in the group on one thing, because then you don't grow. You don't get challenged. Because there's a thing called a false consensus within this whole search community. And if you don't understand what the false consensus effect is, I highly suggest you go look it up on Wikipedia. Because a false consensus is this perceived consensus within a group or a social group of people that think that something is the norm, a thought or something else is the norm. And then they never allow anybody else into that group that challenges them or disputes that consensus thought. And when somebody else does come into that group and challenges it or thinks differently, a lot of people think that that person is defective or is somehow lesser than them, because they don't think the same way as that group. And this became a big part of why during the whole 2016 political election, a lot of people disfriended a lot of people because their political differences were so, great that they defriended people because they weren't like-minded to them or didn't, they thought that their friends were defective because they didn't think the same way. So I see a lot of this on some of the forums, that there's certain groups that think a certain way, and that if somebody comes in with a different thought process, they think they're wrong or they're stupid or they don't get it or whatever else, and they're defective, and they just kind of jump on them. So guys, I'm not saying that my Facebook group with this small group of people is going to be a bunch of bobbleheads. I don't want that. I want people that are going to have good debate back and forth, but I don't want it open to everybody. I want it a good tight-knit group that is really going to be kind of like a think tank, that are going to be able to challenge each other. So if you're interested, guys, please go over there, request to be part of that group. I am not going to have over 50 people in this group. There's no way. It is going to be probably less than half of that, or around 25 people. I may talk with the current members and we may come to a number that is an agreement. But again, guys, it's not going to be bobbleheads. So look it up. It's a Facebook group called The Flip Side. You can look me up on Facebook, Sean Dotson, and then you can find that group from there and then request to become, don't request to be my friend. I'm not asking that. If I know you and have a prior relationship with you, we'll probably have a friendship that way. Other than that, it's just a group, and then we can go from there. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. If not, you're not going to hurt my feelings, guys. Again, it's not for everybody. And I'm not going to allow just anybody and everybody in it. It's going to be a group of people that I think will have good communications back and forth, and we can share ideas and hopefully keep some of those ideas private within that group. Check it out. Do whatever you like. Again, guys, you know me, I don't commit any longer to any kind of set schedule. I just don't want to do that anymore. There's plenty of other YouTubers out there that are doing a great job of doing good content and good things that are going out there. I just jump in whenever I can and have fun. I'll jump in on other people's YouTube channel as a guest and have fun and talk, but that's about it, guys. I got more other things going on in my life that I'd rather commit the time to. But I love talking with you guys once in a while. Brian Gates, at The Flip Side, you need people with the right set of skills to solve the poem. Sure. But I think you still got to have imagination. There's that separation between imagination and knowledge. There's got to be that balance between there. There's people on the spectrum of imagination. There's people on the spectrum of logic. Then there's people that are in the middle. I think you got to have that balance. And that's what I want this group to be about. I don't want everybody that's, like MEH or me, that's strictly, skeptical and logic. And I don't want everybody that's on the other spectrum of just completely imaginative. I want a good group of everybody that's going to challenge each other. And I think that's what's important, that we do that. And even beyond or outside of this, I'm not saying everything's going to be, strictly talk about the chase. We can talk about whatever, and just have fun. Guys, good talking with you. And I hope that you've enjoyed this show. I always like to, say if you've enjoyed it, give it a like afterwards. I don't, people get in these things and they automatically start giving likes before the speakers ever said anything. And that's okay. But I think that you need to have appreciation for the content and what we're talking about, not necessarily just because it's the person. So if you like what we're talking about and you've had a good time, give it a like. If you don't, that's okay. There's another button for you if you don't. You don't hurt my feelings. It's a good way to measure what we're doing here, guys. So hope you've enjoyed it. Glad to talk to you guys. Be safe out there. This is my COVID due. It's getting long. It's definitely gray. Like I got hair going over the years because I haven't got my hair cut. I'm actually considering, should I grow it out or should I not? I don't know. I'm not a hippie, but it would be kind of fun to see what I look like with long hair. I don't know. Good night, everybody. It was good talking with you, and we will catch you all on the flip side. Have a good night.